Hello, happy Tuesday. It is time for our Tuesday devotion, and it's good to be here with you this afternoon. And as you can see, I have another guest here with me today. Miss Hannah is here, and she is here because she's going to help me with a part of the devotion today. So sorry. And she's going to help me. So today's devotion on a promise that God makes to us is from James chapter 4, verse 10. And this verse says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. And so immediately what came to my mind is this song that we sang at camp. Forever growing up, if you know me very well, you know that I'm kind of a Carol Joy Holling lifer. All through school went there and was able to be a counselor there for one summer, and now I send my children there and I take my confirmation kids there, and so I still get to have some camp experience time there as well. So anyway, this song came to my mind immediately, and I wanted to sing it for you, and it's a repeat after me song, and so Hannah is going to help me with it, but don't worry, there's no crazy actions. This one's more of a low-key song, okay? So it goes like this.
It goes like this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord. Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord. And he will lift you up higher and higher, and he will lift you up. Thanks, Hannah. You did a beautiful job. All right, I think she's going to move off screen. She's a little nervous about being on here the entire time. Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord. And our verse from James, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. You know, I thought as I started thinking about this, this issue of pride comes up. And then we wonder, we often ask, is pride really such a bad thing, right? I say things all the time, like to my kids, I'm so proud of you, or I feel pride when a project is completed, or something has, gone right, and you get to see the fruits of that success. And so we do this all the time where we feel pride. But is it really so bad? Because here in Scripture, not only in this one verse in James, but in lots of other places too, we're told that we are to have humility and that we are to humble ourselves. And we're told over and over again that God resists those who are prideful, because and exalts the humble. So that's the first question. And if you look up pride is described as having a deep satisfaction for one's own achievements or self-confidence. And I'd say not just our own achievements, but for the achievements of those that we love and care about too. And humility is defined as being modest or meek. It's not speaking highly of one's own self or accomplishments. So the difference for me, I guess, in these two sides of the spectrum is what the motivation really is. Because with pride, if our motivation is to elevate ourselves over and above other people in a way that allows us to seem better than anyone else, or have more of a status or power or whatever that may be, if it's about elevating ourselves, then that is the pride I believe that God talks about when God says that we are not to be prideful. But if our pride is focused on others and also focused on the fact that we have gotten our strength or our abilities or our gifts and our talents from God, if we're prideful because we're able to glorify God through what it is that we've done, then I feel like that pride is okay. That's the pride that brings us closer to God instead of creating this wedge between us and God. And a good example of this from Scripture is the story of Daniel, and really the story of King Nebuchadnezzar, more so even than the story of Daniel, even though the book in the Old Testament is named after him. So, but King Nebuchadnezzar was, like a lot of kings in the Old Testament, not so great. And what he was seeking was his own power, and he wanted to rule over all the kingdoms of the world, and he wanted people to fear him, and he actually literally built a statue of himself that was 90 feet tall. So we're talking like a huge structure of a 90-foot statue of himself. And then he required and expected the people to bow down before this statue and worship the statue or worship him. And if you didn't do that, if you refused to bow down and worship him, then he would do awful things to you. And that's where we get the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which if you're a VeggieTales fan, head over to youtube.com and type in VeggieTales. Rad, Shack, and Benny is what they're called on there. And it's a really great episode of VeggieTales. so head on over there after we finish the devotion. But these three were put in the fiery furnace. And we're told in the book of Daniel that the furnace was turned up to 7 times its regular temperature. And so it was a little hot. And the 3 of them were put into the furnace. And about partway through, King Nebuchadnezzar looks in and he sees them, but he also sees a 4th person with them. And at the end of the ordeal, Rad, Shack, and Benny, see, I still call them like the VeggieTales, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego come out of the furnace, and they aren't harmed at all. And when they come out of the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar says this. He says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." All right, so the end of that, maybe he missed part of the point. He's not very nice now to the people who worship God. But he does turn from his own ways, and he says, praise be to God, the true God, and that he is able to save his people, and no other God with a little g is able to do this. So if you stop reading right there, you'd think, well, that's great. King Nebuchadnezzar learned from his wrong ways, and he turned to the right ways of God, and that's wonderful. Except that's not what happens. Because when you keep reading, you find that Nebuchadnezzar very quickly goes back to his own ways. He still has people bow down to his statue. He still is definitely not a humble guy. He is exalting himself over and above everybody else, including God. So then comes the time where he has this really strange dream. And his dream includes this gigantic tree. It's so tall, it touches the skies, and it is beautiful and luscious, and it has lots of leaves and lots of fruit, and it protects and feeds the people and the animals underneath of it, and it's just this gorgeous, beautiful thing. It can be seen by all the kingdoms of the world. But in his dream, the tree is cut down, and only a stump remains, and the people have to live there with the animals. Now, he doesn't understand this dream, and so he calls all the wise people, wise men in the kingdom to come and interpret this dream, and only Daniel is able to interpret the dream for him. And Daniel says to him that this tree is him. The tree is Nebuchadnezzar. And just like he saw in his dream, that he would be cut down, and he would have no more power, and he'd have no more shelter, and he'd have to live with the rains of the earth and everything else, and that he would end up living with the animals and even acting like the animals of the earth. And so this is a warning to him about his prideful self and his ways and elevating himself over God and calling him to be humble. But, of course, as the cycle goes, right, he doesn't, and this happens. What Daniel interpreted from the dream actually happens, and it happens for 7 years, where he lives with the animals, he has no shelter, he eats like the animals, he basically loses his mind and is an animal in all forms of that. And at the end of 7 years, this is what Nebuchadnezzar says. This is Daniel 4, and it's starting with verse 34. He says, "At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the people of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'" And then his honor and splendor, Nebuchadnezzar's that is, were returned, and he was restored to the throne. And he says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." So Nebuchadnezzar was given 3 opportunities that we hear about. Chances are he had more than that. But he had 3 chances to turn from his ways, his prideful ways of elevating himself over God, to humble himself. And none of them, only after that 3rd one and after many, many years was he finally ready to humble himself and succumb to this realization that he wasn't in control, that God is in control and God has dominion over the earth. So when you think about that thing I said earlier about motivation, right? What is our motivation when we have pride or how we are humble? And if our motivation is to exalt ourselves, as it was for Nebuchadnezzar, this pride gets in the way of our relationship with God. It hardens our hearts, and it doesn't allow us to take instruction or learn from God's ways and God's words and teachings. This arrogance that comes with that kind of pride doesn't allow us to see who God is and how God cares for creation and for each one of us. That pride is sinful. And so we are asked to humble ourselves before God, just as our James passage says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." Max Lucado, in this chapter on humility, in his book Unshakable Hope, he says that God resists the proud because the proud resist God. And that's where I think this issue of what is our motivation when we are prideful comes in. If our pride allows us to resist God and God's control and God's teachings and God's relationship with us and all the rest, then that is pride that we should not be taking part in. But if our pride is instead for what others have done and what God has done for us and for others, so that God's glory might be shown to the world, that pride is true and acceptable and right. That kind of pride is the pride that we have when our children can finally ride their bike down the street, or finally land that cartwheel that they haven't been able to do, or the pride that we have when things go well in our work or projects are done, and we were able to show these gifts and talents that God has given to us. This pride should be had, but we always should be humbling ourselves before God and knowing that when we do, God lifts us up. instead of making the foundation of our lives ourselves, we are freed instead to put the foundation of our lives on God instead, on God's grace for us. And personally, I think that is a pretty amazing gift, because if I have to rely on myself for everything, I'm not getting very far. And every time I've been tempted to do that in the past, you stumble and you fall, because God is the one who watches over us, who cares for us, who has compassion for us, and in turn asks us to do the same for the rest of God's world. So I want to end with that same song again, and I hope that this song can travel through your minds throughout the day and be a reminder of our verse from James chapter 4, verse 10, which says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." So Hannah's still here. She's just off camera. She was shy today. Say hi to everybody, Hannah.
Hello.
You can talk out loud.
I did.
Okay. All right, so we're going to sing this song, and you heard it once before, so sing it along with us at your homes, even if you feel funny doing it. Nobody's going to hear you, right? Except the people that live with you. They already know we're all a little crazy. So, all right, here we go. Sorry, ready? Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord. Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord. And he will lift you up higher and higher, and he will lift you up. All right. There's our song. Thanks, Barb. We love you too. So, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Allow him to do it. It's not our job. Humble thyself. And I hope that you rest in this promise today. And I look forward to seeing you back here on Thursday for our next round of God's promises. We'll see you later. Say bye to the people, Hannah.
Bye.